As soon as I walked in the door, I could tell something was bothering Marissa. "Hi, sweetheart," she called from the kitchen, giving me a big kiss once I put my briefcase down. But she seemed a bit flushed and avoided looking me in the eye. Throughout dinner, while she talked about her day or listened to my office gossip, there was an uneasy edge to her demeanor. We'd been married for over 4 years, and I knew her well enough to sense when something was wrong. After dinner, she brought me a second cup of coffee and sat across from me with a serious expression. "Honey, can I talk to you about something?" I nodded, and she continued. "I need us to do our thinking thing, okay? Don't respond right away." Our thinking thing was something we learned in counseling a few months before we got married. Marissa and I were both quick to react and sometimes got into heated arguments during our passionate courtship. We realized we needed help to make our relationship work. Our counselor, Dan Ellman, taught us to take a moment when we were angry to sit back, think for a few moments, and avoid responding impulsively with anger. Sometimes it was just a few minutes of reflection. Other times, one of us would wait until the next day to respond. He also taught us both to ask the question of ourselves, when we were angry, what's more important? The thing you're fighting about right now, or the person you care about so much? And of course, we both could see that the answer was always the person. It may sound hokey, but these tricks had helped us a lot. So I said, "Okay, Mare, tell me what's on your mind, and I'll think before I say anything." She leaned forward and took my hand. "First, Simon, this is the most important thing. Don't ever forget this. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. I love being your wife, and I will never ever leave you, okay?" That sounded concerning, but she kept going. "I've been thinking about this stuff. I don't know how to say it. I've been feeling frustrated about our sex life, and..." "You've been feeling frustrated? Wait a minute. Simon." Her voice was sharp. "The thinking came up right. You promised. This won't be easy, but please, sit and listen, and give me a chance." "Sorry, you're right. I'll be quiet," I said, swallowing my angry words. "Honey," she said more quietly, "I know a lot of it is my fault. I know I'm not always as open or receptive as you want me to be." I kept my mouth shut, but barely. God damn right, a lot of it was her fault. I love Marissa with all my heart, and I never regretted marrying her. But Ursac's life was on the disappointing side of ordinary. She didn't want sex more than about once every 10 days, and I had to work hard at it to get her up to once a week. Just as bad, she was firmly vanilla. I got a blue job twice a year, on our anniversary and my birthday, and even then she did it reluctantly, and managed to make me feel thoroughly guilty about it. She was equally reluctant to let me go down on her, which I would have loved to do at least 3 times a week. She'd either flatly refuse, or make me feel like I was mildly perverted for doing it. She'd never let me go on long enough to bring her to a no. And then she'd never let me kiss her afterwards, claiming it was disgusting. Look, as any happily married man knows, and probably the unhappy ones too, it's not all about sex. I love my life with Marissa. Her beauty, her great sense of fun and adventure, just not in the bedroom. Her loyalty and devotion to me, her kindness. Yes, I wanted more and better sex, but I understood that it just wasn't in the cards. And on balance, the deal I had was more than worth it, even if I jacked off to corning my study a lot more than I wanted to, and ducked my wife a lot less. So I sat and listened as she continued, and I didn't much like what I heard. I know I've always been a goody two-shoes about sexamen. Hell, you know my mom, so it's not hard to figure out where I got it from. But lately, I don't know, been feeling restless. Not howny exactly, but something. Like needing to try something, get out of the rut we're in. Or the rut I'm in. I know it partly has to do with hanging out with Sherry and Susie and the others. About a year earlier, Marissa moved to a new real estate firm where she sold residential properties. There was a lively group of women there, and in no time she had a new group of friends. They got in the habit of going out for a regular Friday happy hour, which seemed like the highlight of Marissa's week. I knew the women slightly. Some were married, 2 divorced, and 2 others single. Anyway, Simon, She paused, checking to see if I might yell at her. I don't want you to think this is coming from them, because it isn't. But talking with them about, sex has influenced me. What it is, Simon, is that I want to try to spice up our sex life. I want to experiment a bit with other men and bring that excitement home to you, to make our sex life together as great as it can be. She stopped, clearly expecting an explosive reaction from me. I started to shout, then managed to stop myself. I had promised to listen, and that's what I intended to do, even though my heart was racing. I'm not talking about having an affair, nothing like that, she continued quickly. Just casual, no strings sex with a few other men. One night stands. Or maybe, if I find someone I like, 2 or 3 times. But no romance, no commitment, nothing that could ever threaten what you and I have. I adore you. And remember what I said first. I love you completely, and I'll always be your loving wife. I think doing this could help me loosen up in a way I've never been able to with you, and I think we'll both benefit from it. Baby, this isn't something for me alone. I know you're disappointed in our sex life, and I want to put a charge into it. She stopped, watching me wearily. She actually seemed amazed that I wasn't tearing into her or even stomping out of the room. One more thing, this isn't about cutting you off for anything crazy like that. We'll have at least as much sex as we do now. More, probably, because I think this is going to get me really revved up. That's the point. I want to have more fun with sex, more fun with you. I love you, Simon. She squeezed my hand and then sat back. She looked nervous and sort of exhausted, like she just hiked up a steep hill. Silence. Then finally I said, okay, Mayor. I think I better do quite a bit of thinking before I reply. Tomorrow after dinner, all right. And without waiting for her answer, I stood up and left the kitchen. I sat in my study with the door closed for nearly 3 hours. Shocked, really. I loved Mare, but I would never have expected her to approach me about ducking other guys. I always thought we'd live together happily for our whole lives, even if our sex life was a bit boring. I knew her group of 6 friends from the office influenced this idea. Sherry and Susie, especially, were quite open about their relationships. Sherry dated a lot and Susie had been divorced twice, reportedly for cheating. It seemed likely they filled Marissa's head with thoughts of new experiences. Initially, I was furious. My first reaction was, no way is my wife going to sleep around. If you want that, there's the door. That's all I could think about for the first hour or so until I calmed down. As I became more rational, I realized I liked the idea of Marissa being more open sexually. I wanted more than sex once every 7 to 10 days and included oral sex in our regular routine. I also wanted her to wear sexy stockings or a busty sometimes and maybe play with a sex toy occasionally. I believed Marissa when she said it would be just sex with the other men. At least I believed that she believed it. But I wondered what would happen if she really liked one of the guys she slept with. What if the sex was fabulous, mind-blowing? What if some great-looking guy decided she was the girl for him and put on a full corp press? And I had another thought, somewhere in there, about Diana. Diana, my boss's assistant. Diana, the 24-year-old with the long dark hair who flirted with me pretty much every time she saw me. Who liked to tell me she was between boyfriends and sure wished I was available. Marissa's plan included me going out and getting some fresh kitty while she was trying on some new clocks. I would absolutely never have touched her, or any other woman for that matter. Marriage meant faithfulness to me, period. But what Marissa had asked me pretty much blew up all my previous thoughts about what our marriage was going to be. By the time I finally left the study and went to bed, Marissa was asleep. I'd sat up until well after 11:30 making plans. One thing was for sure. The unquestioned trust I'd had in my wife was now a thing of the past. Whatever we did or didn't agree to do, going forward, I was going to be a far more watchful husband than I had ever been before. In the morning, we had a slightly tense breakfast. I played it cool, sticking to neutral subjects, while Mare kept watching me, alert to any signs of how I was thinking, wondering if an explosion was coming. I grabbed my bag, said, "See you tonight, honey," in a cheerful voice, gave her my usual kiss, nothing more, nothing less, and headed to work. My best friend from college, Rodney Dart, was a security consultant for one of the big oil companies in town. I took him out for a long lunch, explained about the Molotov cocktail Marissa had just tossed into my marriage, and begged for his help. I also gave him my keys to the house, and my ex-girlfriend sat to Marissa's car. By the time I got home, extra early to be sure I'd be there before Marissa, his guys had done their work. There were mini microphones hidden in every room linked to a recorder in the basement and a tap on the phone. There was also supposed to be a recorder under the seat of Marissa's car. I'd check that later. Just as promised, my keys were under the mat on the back deck. I decided on the spur of the moment I'd wait another day to talk to Marissa about her plan. Frankly, I hoped I'd get something from the recorders to give me a better sense of what was in her mind. She had to know I'd be furious, at least at first. I couldn't help but think that her friends had filled her head with stories about the pleasures of casual sex. During dinner with Marissa, I kept the conversation light, avoiding the elephant in the room. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Honey, are you ready to talk about what I mentioned last night?" "Mar, you were right to bring up the thinking game," I replied honestly. "But honestly, I'm not ready to discuss it yet. It was a big shock, and I want to avoid saying something I'll regret." She came over to me and sat on my lap, wrapping her arms around me. "Okay, I understand. But I want you to always remember the most important thing, okay?" I smiled and kissed her. "I know. You love me." "No, you love me. Right." She laughed and kissed me back. "Right? You and only you. And we are going to be together forever. Now come with me." Smiling, she pulled me by the hand into the bedroom, sat me down on the side of the bed, and started taking my clothes off, interrupting her actions for some loving kisses. The sex that followed was a little less vanilla than usual. Without my even asking, Marissa kneeled between my legs and blew me for several minutes, taking her time more than ever before, even licking my balls briefly. She didn't let me finish in her mouth. But that was all right. Instead, she climbed up on me cowgirl style and rode me, letting me caress and pinch her melons for a while, until she fell forward with her head on my shoulder and dug me hard. It was some of the best sex we'd had in a while. When it was over and we were cuddling together, half watching an old Law and Order rerun, I felt a tiny bit calmer. I knew that reassuring me was a big part of why Marissa had gone all out, or at least all out by her standards. But that didn't mean it didn't work, at least up to a point. But it didn't stop me from doing what I'd planned to do late the next morning. I took a long lunch from work. First, I drove over to Marissa's office parking lot, making sure I couldn't be seen from her office. I took the flash drive from the recorder under her front seat and replaced it with a blank one. Then I drove home, got the recordings from the basement, and headed back to work. I figured there was a good chance Mare might have called one of her buddies, either from the house or from her car, and I needed to know if there was anything she hadn't yet told me. There was. Quite a bit, in fact. I heard a 10-minute call she made to Sherry from the house after I left for work, and then a shorter one from the car to Susie. And the long and the short of it was that Marissa's new clocks plan was quite a bit further along than she'd bothered to share with me. To be exact, it was precisely 2 clocks further along. All of a sudden, everything was different. I still love Mare. At least I thought I did. But I didn't trust her anymore. It's one thing to come to your husband and say, "Honey, we need to charge things up. Can we talk about me having sex with other men?" It's a lot to drop on you, but at least it's honest. It also gives you the chance to say no way, not happening. But it's another thing altogether to have that conversation after you've already started exploring with your promiscuous friends. Marissa had hooked up with 2 guys, thanks to Sherry who introduced them. Marissa had slept with both of them, giving the second one oral sex. The first guy was selfish and rushed, and Marissa, being nervous, didn't enjoy it. But Sherry convinced her to try again with Rowan, and that went well. On the recordings, I heard Marissa giggling, telling Sherry that Rowan had made her very happy, and she couldn't wait to see him again. I was beyond livid. I spent the afternoon in my office with the door closed, ignoring calls and messages, occasionally cursing, thinking hard. I knew that I could simply dump the ducking count, and that with the recordings in hand, a divorce would be no problem. On advantageous terms, the trouble was that I wasn't sure. I was too stunned to have any clear sense of what I wanted. No, that's not true. I couldn't see past my immediate desire, which was to put the ducking fear of God into my hole of a wife, who I still loved. Worse luck for me, and who clearly had been let down a particular garden path by some friends who had the world's worst judgment when it came to relationships. So, as they say, one step at a time. No big decisions, just the small, immediate ones. I didn't have to figure out the next year or the next 10 years of my life. Just what I was going to say to Marissa at dinner. I decided to put all my rage and frustration aside. Or rather, since there's no way I could do that, at least to hide it. I tried to be patient and thoughtful and see what I could find out. I was going to do the world's best goddamn acting job ever seen. I left work a little early and surprised her at home with takeout Chinese, which was her favorite. I'd set the table and used the pretty napkins she liked, put out beer glasses, etc. Everything to set a warm, loving mood. She thanked me with a big kiss and a hug, and we enjoyed the dinner, smiling and holding hands a lot. I'm sure she wondered about what I'd have to say to her, but was feeling good about the signals she was getting. I let her into the living room after we cleaned up the kitchen, and we settled together on the couch. Time for a talk, I guess. Okay. She nodded, a big smile on her face. Yes, Simon. And thank you for doing the thinking thing. I know I must have really shocked you the other night and maybe even worried you. She leaned forward. But I want you to remember, I interrupted her. I know, babe. You'll love me, and you'll never leave me, right? She nodded, leaning over to kiss me with her arms around my neck. Then she sat back, looking happy and relaxed, maybe even a little smug. Okay, I said. Mostly I have a lot of questions. As you can imagine, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. So, first, is this experimenting just for you? Or do I get to go out and have sex with other women? Silence. Mare looked uneasy. I couldn't believe this hadn't occurred to her, but she seemed totally buffaloed. Wow, Simon. I don't know. She leaned forward earnestly. I guess I thought that it was me that needed to do the exploring, to loosen up and open up sexually so I'd be a better lover for you. We both know that I'm the more inhibited one. This was certainly true. But is that really fair? I pressed her. For me to stay at home or go bowling or whatever while you're out having sex with other men? Would it be fair that I get less sex while you get more plus the fun of trying out some new clocks? But Simon, she said, clearly frustrated. You'll be getting more sex too, I promise. This is really going to fire me up, and I'll want us to make love a lot more. I smiled as if this were just a friendly conversation. But it would still be you getting more than me, right? All my sex would be with you. But in addition, you'd be getting laid. What, 2 or 3 extra times a week? Somewhat testily, she said. No, it wouldn't be that often, probably. I really don't think you're focusing on the point, Simon. The point is that I need to open up sexually. And you can't or won't do it with me. Yes, I get it, Mayer. How about we try the thinking game on this one, all right? I can tell you're getting upset. So let's just put this aside and come back to it when you're calmer. She took a deep breath, then nodded. Okay, yes. I'm sorry. You were so patient the other night. I'll try to calm down. Can I ask my other questions? I said. And she nodded. The look in her eyes showed she understood that this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I know you said the other guys were just for sex, once or twice each. You said they wouldn't be a threat to us, to our marriage. But I still worry about it. What if you meet a guy and there are sparks? What if he's really amazing in bed, better than me? What if someone really blows your mind? Her eyes widened in alarm as she heard me say the same words she used to describe Rowan to her friend Sherry. Honey, it's you, stammered, looking hesitant. It's not going to be like that, I promise. I love the way we make love, and nothing is going to change that. I mean, even if some other guy is, good sexually, it'll still be just sex. Oh, and what if he's terrific? What if he gives you more pleasure, more ass than I've ever managed, and you 2 or 3 times turns into 6 or 8 or 15, just because you're having such a good time? No, Simon. She struggled to regain control of the conversation. It absolutely won't. I simply won't see anyone more than a few times. A few. The other day it was only once, or maybe 2 or 3 times. How many is a few? 6, 10? Baby, can you trust me on this one? I love you, and I'm simply not going to let anything jeopardize that. Okay, I said. Speaking of trust, as you can guess, my absolute trust in you has been pretty shaken by all this. Despite all the love views, you're my wife, and I need to be able to trust you completely, pure and simple, no exceptions. Otherwise, we don't have a marriage, or at least not one that I can be happy in. So, here goes. First, if I agree to what you're suggesting, will you promise to be completely honest with me? She smiled broadly. This was an easy one, and I could see her relax. Yes, baby, of course. And you won't cheat on me. Sleep with any men behind my back. No, I promise. And you'll tell me the whole truth, and not conceal anything. Of course, Simon. Okay then. I sat back, pretending to consider. Then I said, but I just asked you all those questions in the future tense. What about in the past and present? Have you been completely honest with me so far? Have you slept with any men behind my back? Have you told me everything? Her face froze, and she turned pale as she looked at me. I couldn't understand how she hadn't seen these questions coming. She looked absolutely terrified. I waited for nearly a minute while she stared at me, as if I were a ghost. Finally, I got up from the chair. Well, I guess I have my answer. It wasn't the answer I was hoping for, but I was almost out of the room when I heard her cry out behind me. No, Simon, please. Don't go, let me explain, she pleaded through tears, her face buried in her hands. I turned around and waited, leaning against the wall, until she started to calm down. It must have taken several minutes. I'm so sorry, she said quietly, her hands covering her face. I know I should have talked to you about it first, before I did anything with, other men, I replied. So you mean you've already started your fooling around? My voice was cold and harsh. I knew the answer, but I didn't want her to know about the recording devices. She nodded, still looking down. I knew I should have waited, should have had the conversation first. But Sherry had these guys lined up, and She swallowed hard. I just got excited. I kept my eyes on her, but didn't speak. I had already decided hours earlier that our marriage was over, especially after she had lied to me about the 2 guys she had already been with. Inside, I felt a tiny bit of relief mixed with a lot of anger. I'm not dead. Leave me alone. When I'm ready, I'll be in touch. And don't you even think about ducking anyone else if you have any hopes of staying married to me. I reread the text I'd just written, then hit send. It was short and sweet, just what I was aiming for. It was 36 hours after our last conversation. I'd walked out of the room, grabbed the suitcase I had packed earlier, and driven off to an Airbnb or work that I'd booked for a week. In those 36 hours, Marissa had sent me 30 or 40 texts and called and left more than a dozen messages. But this was my first reply to her. She was clearly terrified, which was just fine with me. The ducking stupid witch. Was this really the woman I'd loved so devotedly, so faithfully? The woman I thought I could count on to be on my side through life? My week at the Airbnb turned into 3 weeks. I spent most of that time just going to work, coming back to the Airbnb, eating takeout, and thinking. I had a couple of long phone conversations with my big brother out in Oregon, and another one with my college friend Rodney. Both of them numerous so pretty well. Both of them listened patiently and generously, and both let me rant and fume without jumping in too quickly with advice. I was really grateful to them. My thoughts and feelings were all over the place, and I tried just to ride them out. Keeping it journal and writing in it every evening actually helped a lot, though I'd never done it before. I could look back over the pages and see the ebbs and flows of hatred, jealousy, and feelings of betrayal, as well as the love for Marissa that was still reeling me underneath. That shit doesn't go away instantly, no matter what anybody tells you. She ducked up, and ducked me up and ducked us up, that was for sure. But she'd also made me feel happy and safe and loved for years, and that doesn't disappear overnight. And so I reminded myself I didn't need to decide everything right away. One step at a time. Decide about tomorrow, about the coming week. Let time do its thing. At the end of the 3rd week, I sent her another text. I'm coming back tomorrow night. You moving into the guest room, at least for now. Get all your stuff out of our bedroom before dinner time tomorrow. The kids swarmed me as soon as I walked through the door, shouting and jumping. I heard Denise in the kitchen, so I called out, "Hey babe," and she replied, "Hi honey, dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. Want to take the kids outside?" I herded them into the backyard where Carl, almost 6, and Amy, 3.5, were bursting with energy. I pushed them on the swings, kicked a soccer ball around, and tried to tire them out a bit before dinner. Denise and I exchanged smiles over spaghetti and meatballs, but it was hard to have a conversation with the kids so lively. Carl wanted to tell us about learning to add, and Amy proudly played a kazoo she tried in preschool. They also mentioned the neighbor's new dog and asked why we couldn't get one, etc., etc. After dinner, it was the usual routine. Cleaning up the kitchen, getting 2 excited children into and out of the bathtub, pajamas on, teeth brushed, reading 2 books, and telling each child a bedtime story. Finally, there was blissful quiet by 8:45 p.m. I fetched a bottle of wine and 2 glasses and joined Denise in the living room. We sat quietly, with her nestled against me on the sofa for about 10 minutes before either of us spoke. Eventually, I broke the silence, saying, "We lead such a calm life, don't we, babe?" She just snorted. "Yeah, nothing to it. A piece of cake." She kissed me and said, "I wouldn't want it any other way, though. I love you," and we both adored those 2 crazy monsters. She rested her head on my shoulder, and we sat quietly for a few more minutes, enjoying our wine. Then she said, "Listen, I just bought a new nightie, and I'm thinking, maybe it's a little too revealing. Could you come and take a look?" I gave her a big grin. I said, "Let me just get the doors and the lights, and I'll be right up to help you with that, all right?" I happily watched her ass wiggle as she headed down the hall, giving me a little extra just for show. "Wait a minute, you're saying Denise? 2 kids. Did I miss something here?" "Not at all. Ever hear the expression older but wiser? Well, you're looking at him." Marissa and I tried to hold on for more than 6 months before I gave up. We went back to the counselor we'd seen before, Dan Allman. We talked, God did we talk, about what Marissa had done. Her desire to expand the range of her sexual experience. How she'd fallen a bit too easily under the sway of her friends, Sherry in particular. We talked and we talked. I listened and listened. I was back in the house again, and we were even having sex, sometimes. But it wasn't good. I wasn't comfortable, and I didn't feel safe. I was, at least some of the time, so angry I could hardly speak to her. We tried to live our normal lives, going out with friends, but even they could see something was off. In the middle of one session, probably about the 30th by then, we were meeting twice a week. I just lost it. Sorry, I'm through listening. Time for me to talk, okay?" Marissa looked at me, interrupted in full flow, talking for the umpteenth time about her needs. and how she realized she should have communicated better. "I think I'm done. I think we're over," Marissa gasped, but Dan just looked at me without expression. I think he saw this coming for a while. "Marissa, what you did was really selfish and awful. You forgot that our first commitment was to each other, to protect and keep each other safe. You went out and slept with a couple of guys because you wanted to, and you came up with some lame excuse to make it seem okay. You talked about opening up our sex life and being a better wife for me, but you didn't think about what it might mean for our marriage. Hell, you didn't even tell me. That's not living up to the commitment you made to me." Tears were rolling down her cheeks, and she tried to interrupt. I put up a hand to stop her. "I wouldn't lie to you and tell you I don't love you anymore. But I don't trust you anymore, and 6 months of sitting here with Dan hasn't changed that. I need a wife who I absolutely know will never put her needs or desires ahead of my feelings, or at least one who won't put a knife in me to get something she wants. And I'm sorry, I don't believe you can ever be that wife for me." I turned to look at Dan. "Dan, I'll keep coming for a couple more sessions if you think that would be helpful for Marissa and me to work through the breakup. But I'm going to file for divorce." I looked back to Marissa, who was sobbing, staring at me entreatingly. "Sorry, Mayor." I stood and left the office. We did have a few more sessions, including one I had alone with Dan. I talked to him pretty frankly about how, with benefit of hindsight, Marissa just seemed emotionally immature to me. Not malicious, just not fully able to see past what she wanted enough to understand how it would affect other people. To my surprise, he agreed with me right away. "I wish it were different, Simon, but I think you're right. She's nearly 30, but in some ways she acts and thinks like a college kid, and when I see her alone, I will be telling her that, straight on. She needs to do some growing up to understand herself better before she embarks on another important relationship." God bless Dan Ellman, he got through to her. Or at least enough that she stopped fighting me and let the divorce go through. I had a little over a year of what I think of as the classic post-divorce bounce back. First, I sat around and drank a bit too much, brewed it too much. Then I turned it around, started working out again, and had some pretty meaningless one-night stands. I dated Diana from work for about 6 weeks, and we had a lot of fun, both in and out of bed. But we both knew it was never going to be anything serious. On a Saturday in January, I woke up and surprised myself. Maybe I had a dream. I don't know. I found myself thinking, "Okay, you're done with this sheep. Casual sex was fun, but it wasn't for you, so no more. Let's get your head straightened out. Figure out what makes you happy. Then do that." I decided to focus on a simple goal: having fun. I planned to call my friends more often, go to the movies more, and take more vacations. I wanted to worry less about women and sex, and just let time take its course. But of course, life had other plans for me. The following Wednesday, I was supposed to meet Rodney and his wife Allison for dinner. When I arrived at the restaurant, I found out it was going to be a double date. Allison's cousin Denise had recently ended a bad relationship in Phoenix and moved here for a new job. Rodney suggested to his wife, "Hey, why not invite Denise to dinner with us? She and Simon might get along." 16 months later, Denise and I were married. Rodney was my best man, and Allison was the matron of honor. As for Marissa, I don't know much. She moved out to the West Coast, and I heard she might have gotten married. I wish her well, but she isn't part of my life anymore. Second story. Fiancé cheated. What to do? Found out that my fiancé was cheating on me when we first got together. His job requires him to be away from home often. When we started dating, he suggested I quit my job and travel with him because he thought it would bring us closer and he could support us financially. We're older and both have trust issues from past relationships. To build trust, we have access to each other's phones. But recently I discovered he cheated on me with a few girls during the first 4 months of our relationship, before I joined him on the road. This happened over a year ago, and he stopped after I joined him. I feel deeply hurt and betrayed. But I haven't confronted him about knowing. Should I talk to him about it? Or keep it to myself since he hasn't cheated since we started traveling together?